Mass Effect is a game series that's always been very close to my heart, so of course you could probably understand that I was a little bit concerned when I heard even before the game's launch about some of the problems it had. Even if you haven't been following Mass Effect Andromeda's release, you've probably either seen or heard some of the memes about it already. But I was willing to go into it with an open mind because of all the good things I'd seen and heard about it before the memes cropped up. So of course I'm going to go into more detail about this later, but the TLDR for Mass Effect Andromeda is to go into it expecting something different from previous games. It feels more so like a spin-off Mass Effect game, kind of like Halo 3 ODST was for Halo. It still has a lot of the defining features of Mass Effect, but the focus in some places this time around is a little different than it was previously. So without further ado, let's get right into the heart of it. One thing I gotta say right off the bat is from a visual and gameplay perspective, this is probably the best iteration in the franchise yet. And now before anyone jumps down my throat for saying that, I'd like to reiterate I mean only in those two areas it is, not overall as a whole. Now to explain, first let's start with the combat. Shooting and melee controls are tightened up a lot from Mass Effect 3, so it not only feels smoother and more satisfying, but also has fewer targeting issues, jarring transitions between melee and shooting, and randomly having your reload interrupted by entering and exiting cover, which has also seen an improvement, taking after Ghost Recon Wildlands actually a little bit, with a dynamic cover system that works automatically as soon as you walk close to a piece of cover. It doesn't work as well as it does in Wildlands, but it's still a huge improvement from cover in previous games. Jump jets and clambering have been added now, and while it seems to be a common trope in new games lately, it's not without good reason since it adds a lot of fun verticality and interesting tactics to the game, not to mention the extra level of freedom it adds to the single player exploration. Skills and powers have also seen some tweaks and improvements from previous games, with abilities now clearly labeled as to whether or not they set up or detonate a combo, as well as just some plain new abilities that are added to the game. And class restrictions have been removed from the single player mode, allowing you to pick any ability you want from any tree. And the classes instead make it into the game in the form of profiles, which you can swap out at any point you want through the menu, and each level up individually based on how many points you spend in each particular tree, like the engineer profile leveling up the more points you put into tech abilities, and the adept profile leveling up the more points you put into biotics, and so on, with unique traits and abilities specific to when that profile is equipped. And in terms of visuals, this game is fucking beautiful, with gorgeous sights to be seen both planet-side and venturing through the Helios cluster, with huge open worlds with tons to explore in each planet, but also with a high level of detail not just in the environments, but also, believe it or not, with the characters themselves. Now before you say anything, I know they look weird sometimes and I'll elaborate on that later, but weird or not, they are very detailed, with a general aesthetic for the armors and some of the alien structures that kinda reminds me of Halo, and not the original Halos like we had when Bungie was making it, but the newer Halos that sort of started their own aesthetic when 343 took over. And now that doesn't sound like praise at first, since the new art style for Halo has been widely criticized. And trust me, I'm right there with you. I'm not a huge fan of the new aesthetic for Halo, but I've always seen it as a problem, not in that the art style is strictly speaking bad, but that it just didn't fit with Halo. Here in Mass Effect, we see almost the exact same art style, with the characters even looking like Spartans themselves. In fact, if you put one of the characters alongside a Spartan on the same screen, it'd be hard to tell the difference. And yet it works here, and it looks great despite it being the exact same thing, because that's the style that Mass Effect has already built for itself. Hell, as unlikely as it is, because this is EA we're talking about, but if there was some form of mod support for Mass Effect Andromeda, I could see a mod changing things to look more like Halo with very little effort required. Just replace some weapon and helmet models and you're pretty much done. And this game provides a wonderful sense of discovery and exploration that you don't see all too often these days. Not just with the beautiful scenery, but with the way it handles side quests as well, where you're exploring and discovering new things, making first contact with unknown alien species, and uncovering ruins of ancient civilizations. And I love how the game acknowledges your exploration outside of the main story by changing some of the dialogue, taking note during the main missions of some of the stuff you did during the side missions. And of course, one of the things I mentioned in my Wildlands review is that you know you're playing a good open world game when you can get lost doing side missions instead of just the main quest. And where Wildlands does this by making the gameplay mostly emergent, Andromeda does this by making the side quests just as interesting and well directed as the main quest.
For the last time, report. We just fixed those base seals. If you idiots blew them, I'll have your skins!
Everything's under control. Just a simple weapon malfunction. How are you?
What is this? Get cameras on the bay. We'll figure it out! Stokes. This ship is property of Talonwing. Now you're property too, just like the rest.
Well, that wasn't going anywhere useful. Shoot pirates, rescue contact? So where to?
Find Varand and fast. This way. Not that way. Not there. Let's go.
And while I'll admit this can't be said for every character in the game, the new cast of characters in Mass Effect Andromeda has plenty of interesting personalities to meet and get to know. And now I'm definitely gonna go into more detail about this later. I can definitely say that a lot of the fan complaints of a lack of interesting characters is mostly just being alarmist because we don't have any of the returning characters from the originals, which is an understandable complaint to have since the original characters were classic and brilliant. But to say there are no interesting characters here is just downright false. And the last unfounded complaint I've heard about Andromeda is the lack of a Paragon Renegade system this time around. For some reason, a lot of people are upset that this system has been removed, but I always felt like the Paragon Renegade system was weighing the franchise down, since it was only a vestigial feature left over from Knights of the Old Republic, which Mass Effect has always driven heavy inspiration from, and for good reason because it's one of the best games ever made in my opinion. But the thing is, it worked in Knights of the Old Republic because it was a Star Wars game with light side and dark side that you had to worry about. Now that the system's gone, it opens up options for role-playing, basing your conversation choices now off of how the other characters will react instead of whether or not it's good or bad. Where before conversation options were sorted into Paragon, Neutral, and Renegade, now it's sorted into snarky, formal, logical, and emotional. While unfortunately this does lead to sometimes you saying things that seem more dickish once they actually come out of your mouth than when you select the option, I think that overall this new system works better, allowing you to say whatever the hell you want this time around, without worrying about some arbitrary good or bad meter. The infamous romance scenes that Mass Effect is famous for definitely make a return here with a vengeance, going a step further than before, showing almost full frontal nudity with nipples and everything. Although it does seem a little odd with the Turian romance option how it just fades to black instead of showing anything, which was a thing in the previous games since they didn't really know how to portray naked Turians. But they have portrayed the new alien species, the Angara, naked, so I definitely think they should have taken the time to establish what a naked Turian looks like, instead of just having the scenes fade to black before the action started. But even then, it still exceeds what was done in previous games, so I can't complain too much. And lastly, while the main story is somewhat familiar for the Mass Effect franchise, it's still fairly interesting and will keep you moving forward. And while it comes in as the weakest story in the Mass Effect franchise, the ending is incredibly well done, bringing to mind a lot of the flaws with Mass Effect 3's ending, and making you think if Mass Effect 3 had this kind of detail to it, it wouldn't have been such a terrible ending. With all the assets you've gathered throughout your playtime converging in this final epic battle. So whatever you've heard about the plot is probably true, but it definitely doesn't apply to the ending, which I thought was phenomenal.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
Your face is tired from basic facial expression. Yeah, I'm sure you all knew this was coming. Of course, the very first thing I have to talk about for this part of the video is the facial animations. I knew going into this game that they were gonna be bad. I had seen the memes. But even if you think you're prepared to put up with these animations, think again. These animations are so horrendous. Coming from a developer with a reputation like BioWare's, combined with the buggy faces some of the characters make all the time, makes me think that it isn't necessarily the animator's fault, but that it's just a bug that's preventing the correct animations from playing. Especially when you look at other points in the game where the facial animations are pretty well on point. But unfortunately, moments like that are too few and far between here. And what you're unfortunately left with most of the time are these blank, emotionless faces where only their mouth is moving. And there are moments where it's so apparent and so in your face, it's just unbearable to look at. Now, to be fair, it is a step up from Dragon's Dogma, but it's a step down from Mass Effect 1 back in 2007. That is not the kind of quality we expect from BioWare. We expected more. It's a bad sign when 3 games later after the original, we're actually getting worse animations than before. While all the characters' faces are detailed, a lot of them seem to be built strangely. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. More specifically with the human faces, all the aliens look perfectly fine, but all the human faces look off or unnatural. Combined with the stiff, awkward animations, it makes it seem like all the humans are just robots wearing a wax mask, pretending to be human. And then considering the main character is human, this means the character creator is all sorts of fucked up. So as a result, if you want a decent looking character, you're gonna have to either spend hours after hours in the character creator, or go online and find the settings for someone else who spent hours and hours in the character creator trying to make a decent looking human. And next, for every interesting character I mentioned earlier, I'm not gonna name any names, but there are just as many that you really won't give 2 shits about. So all that being said, it doesn't really live up to previous Mass Effect titles in terms of characters and storytelling, which is why it's important to go into this with a different mindset. Try to play it more like Skyrim and less like Mass Effect. But even if you go in with that mindset, it doesn't do everything quite as well as Skyrim did. While it certainly matches or maybe even surpasses Skyrim in terms of quest content, one of Skyrim's biggest strengths and why it was so popular was how much there was to discover aside from just quests, the caves and landmarks and so on. While it definitely won't say it's non-existent in Andromeda, it just doesn't feel like there's enough of it compared to Skyrim, where you'd be able to walk around for 10 minutes on foot and find at least 2 caves or landmarks. Andromeda just isn't as densely packed as that, which is unfortunate given how heavily Andromeda leans on that style of gameplay. At least for better or worse, they've got Bethesda matched on the amount of bugs in the game. Then the last couple nitpicks I have for the single player is that there's no way to skip the lengthy cutscenes traveling between star systems and landing on planets, which are really cool the first like 2 or 3 times you see them. But after that, you'll actually wish you had a loading screen instead. At least that way it'll start once everything's all loaded in. And next, I wish developers would get over this whole automatic flashlight trend. It bothered me in Resident Evil and it bothers me here, where they try to implement a flashlight that'll turn on automatically when it's dark and turn back off when it's light. But you'll always end up either in a dark place with no flashlight or in a brightly lit area wondering why your flashlight's on. We need to have manual control of our flashlight in a video game. I'm getting real fucking sick of this automatic flashlight thing and I just wish it would stop. And lastly, moving on to the multiplayer, don't get me wrong, it is a lot of fun actually. And it's great for when you're wanting to just jump into the game and play some of the new combat, which is really fun. But unfortunately, there just isn't a whole lot there. Every single match essentially breaks down to a 7-round objective-based horde mode, with no real varying game modes to speak of. And what's more is PC players will be let down by the fact that there's no text chat option. So if you either don't have or aren't willing to use a microphone, you're not going to be able to talk with your team at all. And then lastly, I'll just let this footage speak for itself. I'm not sure what to say about this. We know that their DLC plans are gonna be different in some way this time around, and you all know I always defend microtransactions if it means we get free DLC, but they haven't said what their plans are for the DLC this time. All we know is that there won't be a season pass, so maybe there's hope that we'll have free DLC, and then I'll forgive them for the microtransactions. But this is EA we're talking about, and the fact that they haven't announced their plans for the DLC is a little disturbing. So for now I'm gonna operate on the assumption that the DLC will be paid and the microtransactions are shitty and I'm gonna dock points because of it. But we just don't know what they're gonna do yet, so there is a little bit of hope that it will be free. So I guess watch out for that. On the topic of multiplayer, I wish they allowed you the option to fully customize your character in multiplayer, on par with the customization available to you in the single player, with the different skills, powers, and races unlockable through gameplay or through the shitty microtransaction bullshit. Allow players to fully customize their appearance and build for multiplayer, but also to use that character to join in single player games in a cooperative campaign. If there's one thing Ghost Recon Wildlands set as a standard, it's open world campaign co-op. After playing Wildlands, I have to criticize any open world game that doesn't have co-op now. I could have totally seen it as an option to invite a friend to your game to replace your squad members as an Apex team member, with the chosen story squad mates chiming in through radio when they have to, with the guest players earning multiplayer currency that they could use to build their character without playing the cookie cutter multiplayer matches. And in the same spirit of allowing you to customize your character with different races and multiplayer, it was a wasted opportunity here switching to a new character, Ryder. Whereas Shepard from the previous games was established to be a human character, they could have let us pick from our choice of races, Turians, Krogans, Solarians, and it would have fit the theme of this game perfectly about a new start in a new galaxy, with any race you want to be. And if you pick Turian, for example, make it so the human arc ends up where the Turian arc did, and the Turian arc is instead the ship you start on. And lastly, with the new spaceflight system, like I mentioned earlier, I find myself getting really annoyed by the unskippable transitions going between planets. They honestly would have been better off with the old galaxy map system from the first 3 games, but what I think would have been better would be to add an actual spaceflight system. Make this game a competitor with No Man's Sky, Star Citizen, and Elite Dangerous by giving the Tempest weapons and allowing you to pilot it yourself, opening up possibilities for space missions and space combat with Ket ships. It seems like the Helios cluster is all fully rendered in the first place, so I really don't see why not. The only assets they really need to add is a first-person cockpit view and some weapons for your ship. Then set up some spaceflight controls to move yourself around the cluster and boom, you've got it. Throw in some space missions on top of that and you've got an A+ game here. And lastly, the very first planet you get to has an interesting mechanic where most of the map is unexplorable due to high levels of radiation, but if you activate the alien terraformer and come back later, more of the map will be explorable. Unfortunately though, this same mechanic doesn't apply to all the other planets, and activating the terraformers on those planets only serves to move the plot forward. And as big as this game is, with competition like Ghost Recon Wildlands and the new Final Fantasy, where you have these absolutely humongous open worlds, Mass Effect by comparison could use a bit of expansion in terms of map sizes. So I really wish that expanding map mechanic with the terraformers applied to all the planets. So all that being said, it's time to come to the final verdict. Mass Effect Andromeda as it stands right now is an 8 out of 10. We've been getting a lot of those lately. But it also has my seal of approval. I really love this game. The exploration and discovery in a huge open world with a very interesting combat system. Everything this game stands for is exactly what I play video games for. But objectively speaking, it could have been much better. If the animations and the bugs are something that can be fixed in a patch, then that would bring it up to a 9 out of 10. And if this game had space flight and co-op, it would be a solid 10 out of 10. But it doesn't have spaceflight and co-op, and it is poorly animated and full of bugs, so in its current state, it's an 8 out of 10. But an 8 out of 10 that will consume countless hours of your time. And we'll just have to wait and see what they do with this game in the future, so until then, I'll see you guys next time.
No acting like overacting. Even Ryder could do better.
If I wanted to.
Ha, now you have to do it. Come on, show us. I'll be dead for you.
Okay. It isn't fair.
He was so young and... Solarian. He had so much to give!
Ryder, I can't feel my gallbladder.
Do you even have a gallbladder?
Oh no, it's worse than I thought. Oh.
No. Damn you! Damn you all!
Let's stick with the overacting Turian.
I swear to love you 1,000 times, 1,000 stars.
Oh, Jorax. So many years lost. We were so foolish. Our hearts are one. No enemy fleet, no sea of stars can ever separate us again.